September the 19th, 1944, 0547 hours, Arracourt, France. The fog hung over the rolling farmland like a grey woolen blanket, so thick that Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams couldn't see beyond his Sherman tank's gun barrel. From his position commanding the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armoured Division, he knew the Germans were coming. Intelligence had reported massive Panzer movements during the night. Elements of the 5th Panzer Army, including the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, equipped with the formidable Panther tanks, were counter-attacking to stop Patton's 3rd Army from reaching the German border. But in this fog, visibility measured in yards rather than miles, and Abrams understood that the coming battle would be won or lost not by the specifications stamped on factory blueprints, but by the discipline, training and communication of American tank crews who had learned to fight as a coordinated team rather than individual warriors. The battle that would unfold over the next week near the small French village of Arracourt would shatter German assumptions about American armoured warfare. It would prove that tactical excellence, superior crew training, and revolutionary radio communications could overcome the Panthers' theoretical superiority in armour and firepower. The Wehrmacht had sent their newest tanks, their most experienced crews from the Eastern Front, and their best tactical doctrines. They would discover that American tankers had transformed the Sherman from what German propaganda dismissed as a Ronson lighter, a reference to the cigarette lighter that lit first time every time, into a weapon system that could destroy German armour through coordination, speed, and tactics that turned the fog itself into an American advantage. The roots of American victory at Arracourt lay not in the steel mills of Detroit or the drawing boards of weapons designers, but in the radio factories and training grounds where the United States Army had revolutionized armoured warfare in ways the Germans never fully understood. While German tanks remained superior in individual combat specifications, American doctrine had created something unprecedented in military history, an armoured force where every tank could communicate instantly with every other tank, where company commanders could coordinate 5 tanks as precisely as a conductor leading an orchestra, where information flowed so efficiently that American formations could react to threats faster than German units could execute orders. The Sherman tank that equipped the 4th Armoured Division in September 1944 was, on paper, outmatched by the German Panther in nearly every measurable specification. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 gun could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armour at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could barely scratch Panther frontal armour even at point-blank range. The Panther's sloped frontal armour measured 80mm thick at 55 degrees, effectively 140mm against straight trajectory fire. The Sherman's frontal armour topped out at 51mm, pathetic by comparison. German tankers who had fought Shermans on the Eastern Front and in Normandy knew these numbers well and approached the Arracourt counteroffensive with confidence bordering on arrogance. What German intelligence had failed to appreciate was that by September 1944, every Sherman in the 4th Armoured Division carried 3 radio sets. The SCR 528 provided communication between tanks within a company. The SCR 508 allowed communication between companies and battalion headquarters. The SCR 510 connected the battalion to division command. A Sherman company commander could talk simultaneously to his 5 tanks, coordinate with adjacent companies, and receive intelligence updates from reconnaissance units operating miles ahead. This represented a revolution in battlefield awareness that transformed how armoured warfare was conducted. German tanks, by contrast, typically carried a single radio set, often only in the company commander's vehicle. Platoon leaders communicated through hand signals, flags, or by physically moving their tanks close enough to shout to other commanders. Orders flowed down a rigid hierarchy. Information flowed up slowly, if at all. A German tank platoon operated more like 5 individual fighters than a coordinated team. When the fog descended over Arracourt on the morning of September 19th, this difference would prove catastrophic. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams exemplified the new breed of American armoured commander. Just 29 years old, he had graduated from West Point in 1936 and spent the pre-war years studying armoured tactics. Unlike many American officers who had learned their trade from European manuals translated and adapted, Abrams had helped write American doctrine from scratch. He understood instinctively that radio communication changed everything about tank warfare. Speed of decision mattered more than thickness of armour, coordination trumped individual superiority, information was as valuable as ammunition. The 37th Tank Battalion under Abrams' command had been in continuous combat since landing in France after D-Day. They had fought through hedgerows in Normandy where German tanks ambushed from concealed positions. They had learned that American advantages in mobility, coordination and rapid fire could overcome German advantages in armour and gunpowder. They had developed tactics specifically designed for Sherman capabilities, rather than trying to fight the German way with inferior equipment. By September, the battalion was a finely tuned machine where every crew knew exactly what to do without being told, where standard operating procedures meant that tanks could coordinate with minimal radio traffic, where years of training had created an almost telepathic understanding between crews. The German forces assembling to attack Arracourt represented the opposite philosophy. The 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel had been formed in late August from remnants of units mauled in Normandy, reinforced with fresh Panzer brigades equipped with new Panther tanks straight from the factories. These Panthers represented Germany's best thinking in tank design, incorporating lessons learned from encountering Soviet T-34 tanks on the Eastern Front. The sloped armour, the powerful long-barreled gun, the excellent optics, and the 700-horsepower Maybach engine made the Panther arguably the best tank in the world on a specification sheet. But the crews manning these Panthers were a mixture that revealed Germany's desperate situation in September 1944. The 111th Panzer Brigade included veterans from the Eastern Front who understood tank combat but had never fought Americans. They had learned tactics against Soviet mass attacks, where Panthers could stand off and destroy T-34S at long range. They expected similar tactics from American tankers. The 113th Panzer Brigade was even less prepared, composed largely of personnel scraped together from training units, depot troops, and even Luftwaffe ground crews retrained as tankers. These men had perhaps 20 hours' experience in Panthers, barely enough to drive the complex machines, certainly insufficient for the kind of coordinated combat they were about to face. The German plan for the Arracourt counteroffensive reflected both Hitler's strategic delusions and German tactical doctrine. The goal was to smash through the advanced positions of Patton's Third Army, recapture the fortified city of Nancy, and if possible push all the way back to the Moselle River. This would cut off American spearheads and buy time for German forces to establish a winter defensive line. The attack would be spearheaded by approximately 200 Panthers and Panzer IVs, supported by infantry and assault guns. On paper, this concentration of armour should have been overwhelming against the scattered American units that had outrun their supply lines in the dash across France. What the Germans didn't know was that the 4th Armoured Division, though spread thin, had established a comprehensive network of observation posts, maintained constant radio contact between all units, and had developed a tactical system where apparent American weakness was actually strength. Lone American tanks or small groups of Shermans that appeared isolated were actually nodes in a network able to call in devastating artillery support within minutes or guide fighter bombers to targets with precision. The division's reconnaissance units operated miles ahead of the main force, reporting German movements back to headquarters, where the information was immediately distributed to every tank commander. The fog that descended on September 19th was unusual for the season, a thick morning mist that reduced visibility to 50 yards or less. German commanders, accustomed to long-range engagements where Panther superiority was overwhelming, were frustrated but not concerned. They would advance in standard formation, maintaining company integrity, pushing through the fog to smash the thin American screen they knew was ahead. Radio communication between tanks was considered secondary to proper formation keeping. German tank commanders were trained to navigate by compass and pace count, maintaining position through visual contact with adjacent tanks. American doctrine was different. When fog reduced visibility, American tankers increased radio communication, coordinating through voice rather than sight. Company commanders maintained constant contact with all 5 tanks, adjusting formation based on verbal reports rather than visual observation. Battalion headquarters tracked every company's position through radio reports, building a mental picture of the battlefield that was more accurate than what any individual tank commander could see with his eyes. At 0600 hours, the first German units began their advance. the 113th Panzer Brigade moved down the main road toward Arracourt with approximately 40 Panthers in the lead elements. They advanced in column formation, standard procedure for road movement, expecting to deploy into combat formation when they encountered American resistance. The fog was so thick that company commanders couldn't see beyond the second tank in their columns. This should have been a signal to halt, regroup, and wait for visibility to improve. But German orders emphasized speed and aggression. The attack must maintain momentum. The Panthers rolled forward blind. What happened next revealed the profound difference between American and German tactical systems. American listening posts detected the sound of German tanks at 615 hours. The noise of 40 Maybach engines was unmistakable. Radio reports went immediately to the 37th Tank Battalion headquarters. Within 2 minutes, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams knew the Germans were advancing in column down the main road, knew approximately how many tanks were involved, and knew exactly where his own forces were positioned. He began issuing orders before the Germans had any idea American tanks were present. Company C of the 37th Tank Battalion, under the command of Captain William Dwight, consisted of 5 Sherman tanks positioned in a defensive position overlooking the road. In the fog, they were invisible to the advancing Germans. Dwight received his orders from Abrams over the radio. Hold fire until the German column was fully engaged. Coordinate fire with adjacent units, target lead and trail vehicles first to trap the column. Every Sherman commander in Company C heard these orders simultaneously on their radios. Every crew knew exactly what to do. The German column advanced straight into the trap. The lead Panther, commanded by Lieutenant Friedrich Weber of the 113th Panzer Brigade, had no idea American tanks were nearby until the first 75mm shell struck his tank's right side. The Sherman's gun, ineffective against frontal armour, was devastating against side armour at close range. The Panther exploded, blocking the narrow road. Before the German crews could react, the trail Panther was hit and destroyed. 40 German tanks were trapped in column on a single road, unable to see their enemy through the fog, unable to deploy into combat formation. What followed was slaughter made possible by American radio coordination. Company C's 5 Shermans fired in sequence, each crew taking assigned targets called out by Captain Dwight. The Germans couldn't return effective fire because they couldn't see where the Americans were positioned. German radio discipline collapsed as commanders screamed contradictory orders, trying to organize a response. Some Panthers tried to reverse, colliding with tanks behind them. Others attempted to deploy off the road, becoming bogged in soft ground. Through it all, American fire continued with methodical precision. The engagement lasted 23 minutes. When the fog began to lift around 700 hours, Company C's 5 Shermans had destroyed or disabled 17 Panthers without losing a single tank. The remaining German tanks had retreated in confusion, leaving burning wrecks scattered along the road. German after-action reports would describe the engagement as an ambush, bad luck, terrain that favoured the defence. They never understood the real cause of their defeat. American radio coordination had allowed 5 tanks to fight as one organism, concentrating fire, calling targets, adjusting tactics in real time. The Germans had fought as individual tanks that happened to be in the same place, each crew making independent decisions without information about what was happening elsewhere. The pattern repeated throughout the day across the Arracourt battlefield. German tank companies advancing in standard formation encountered American tanks that appeared from the fog, destroyed German armour with carefully coordinated fire, and disappeared before effective response was possible. Every engagement followed the same script. German tanks advanced confidently, expecting their superior specifications to carry the day. American tanks used radio coordination to concentrate fire, outmaneuver, and destroy German armour before the enemy could bring their advantages to bear. By nightfall on September 19th, the 113th Panzer Brigade had lost over 40 tanks, more than a third of their strength, for minimal American losses. German commanders were baffled. The Americans were supposed to be inferior in tank warfare, equipped with inadequate vehicles, crewed by inexperienced soldiers. Yet they were winning decisive victories against Germany's best equipment. Something fundamental had changed in armoured warfare, but German doctrine had no framework for understanding what. The next several days saw German commanders attempting different approaches, all of which failed against American tactical superiority. On September 20th, the 111th Panzer Brigade tried a night attack, assuming darkness would negate American advantages. They discovered that American tanks equipped with radio could coordinate in total darkness better than German tanks could in daylight. American artillery, called in by radio from forward observers who could direct fire on targets they couldn't see, devastated the German formation. The attack collapsed with heavy losses. On September 21st, German forces attempted to use their range advantage, engaging American tanks from distances where Panther guns were effective but Sherman guns were not. This tactic failed because American forward observers, equipped with radios and positioned in concealed observation posts, called in fighter-bomber strikes on German positions. P-47 Thunderbolts armed with rockets attacked Panther concentrations before they could close to engage. The few Panthers that survived to firing range found themselves under attack from multiple directions as American tank companies coordinated through radio to flank German positions. The engagement on September the 22nd demonstrated the full potential of American radio coordination combined with aggressive tactics. A German battle group built around 30 Panthers attempted to envelop an American position near the village of Arracourt. The attack was carefully planned, with Panthers advancing in 2 columns to catch the Americans in a pincer movement. German commanders maintained radio silence to preserve surprise, coordinating through prearranged timelines rather than continuous communication. The American response showcased everything the 4th Armoured Division had learned about modern armoured warfare. Reconnaissance units spotted the German advance 30 minutes before the Panthers came into range. Radio reports went immediately to battalion headquarters. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams coordinated a response involving 3 tank companies, 2 artillery battalions, and a squadron of P-47s that happened to be on station. Every element received precise instructions over radio. Timing was coordinated to the minute. When the German pincers closed, they found empty positions. The Americans had withdrawn under cover, relocated, and were waiting in ambush positions when the Germans advanced. The resulting engagement destroyed 28 Panthers in less than an hour. American tanks hit the German columns from 3 directions simultaneously, coordinated fire missions eliminating German armour faster than crews could bail out. Artillery fire disrupted German attempts to organise a defence. Fighter bombers attacked command vehicles, recognizing them by the extra antennas that marked radio-equipped tanks. By the time German survivors retreated, the entire engagement plan had been shattered by American coordination that turned individual German advantages into collective liability. German tank crews began calling the Arracourt battlefield the Panther graveyard. Veterans from the Eastern Front, accustomed to dominating Soviet armour, found themselves consistently outmaneuvered by American tankers they had dismissed as amateurs. The psychological impact was devastating. Crews who knew their tanks were superior in every measurable specification were being destroyed by supposedly inferior enemies. The only explanation that made sense within German military culture was that Americans had overwhelming numerical superiority. After-action reports inflated American strength to justify defeats. A company of 5 Shermans became a battalion of 50 in German accounts. The reality was that American advantages were qualitative, not quantitative. The 4th Armoured Division was typically outnumbered in most engagements around Arracourt, but numbers meant less than coordination. A German company of 10 Panthers that couldn't communicate effectively fought as 10 individual tanks. An American company of 5 Shermans that maintained constant radio contact fought as a single entity with 5 guns. The mathematics of concentration of force favoured the Americans despite German numerical parity or even superiority. The crew discipline that enabled American radio coordination was itself a product of training that German forces couldn't match by late 1944. American tank crews trained together for months before entering combat, learning to work as teams where every member understood his role without explicit instruction. Radio operators were trained to maintain calm professional communication under fire, reporting clearly and concisely even when their tank was under attack. Commanders learned to process multiple radio conversations simultaneously, maintaining awareness of friendly positions, enemy movements, and tactical opportunities. German training by September 1944 had collapsed under the pressure of casualties and equipment losses. new crews received perhaps 3 weeks of instruction before being thrown into combat. Radio for operation was treated as a technical skill rather than a tactical capability. Commanders received minimal training in coordinating with adjacent units. The emphasis remained on individual tank gunnery and mechanical operation. This produced crews that could fight but not coordinate, a fatal weakness against American tactical doctrine. The Battle of Arracourt reached its climax on September 29th when German forces launched a final major attack with every available Panther. This assault involved over 70 tanks, the largest single concentration of armour the Germans had managed since the battle began. Commanders hoped that pure mass would overwhelm American defences. They advanced in broad daylight across open ground, accepting that American advantages in coordination would be in full effect. The plan was simple: present so many targets that American tankers couldn't kill them all before German tanks closed to point-blank range where Panther armour would be decisive. The attack failed catastrophically. American coordination turned mass into liability. As German tanks advanced across open terrain, every American unit had perfect information about the attack's progress. Artillery fire, coordinated through radio, caught Panthers in the open. Fighter bombers, directed by ground controllers who maintained continuous radio contact, attacked German formations with devastating accuracy. Sherman tanks, positioned in carefully prepared ambush sites, engaged from flanks and destroyed German armour before the Panthers could close to effective range. The engagement lasted from dawn until mid-afternoon. When it ended, the 4th Armoured Division had destroyed 43 Panthers and damaged dozens more for the loss of 15 Shermans. More significantly, the German 5th Panzer Army's offensive capability was broken. The surviving Panthers, many with inexperienced crews traumatised by the slaughter, withdrew toward the German border. The Battle of Arracourt was over. American forces held the field and would continue their advance toward Germany. German attempts to understand their defeat at Arracourt focused on factors that fit existing doctrine. After-action reports emphasized difficult terrain, poor weather, effective American use of artillery, and fighter-bomber support. All of these were true but secondary. The real cause of German defeat, American superiority in tactical coordination, enabled by radio communication, was barely mentioned because German military culture had no framework for recognizing communication as a decisive factor in armored combat. The numbers told a story that German commanders couldn't ignore, even if they didn't fully understand it. In 10 days of fighting around Arracourt, German forces lost approximately 200 tanks, mostly Panthers, along with supporting vehicles and infantry. American losses totaled 31 tanks destroyed, with most crews surviving. The exchange ratio exceeded 6-1 in American favour. More disturbing for German planners, this wasn't an anomaly. Similar patterns were appearing wherever American armoured divisions engaged German panzers. The Wehrmacht was losing the war of attrition in armour despite fielding superior tanks. American tankers understood what they had accomplished. The 4th Armoured Division's after-action reports emphasised coordination, crew discipline, and effective use of combined arms. Tank commanders credited radio communication as the decisive factor, noting that the ability to share information and coordinate fire had transformed 5 individual tanks into a single weapon system, vastly more capable than the sum of its parts. This represented a profound evolution in military thinking that would influence armoured doctrine for generations. The technical superiority of German tanks was real and undeniable. A Panther in ideal conditions with a trained crew engaging a Sherman at long range would win almost every time. But battles aren't fought in ideal conditions by specifications on paper. They're fought in fog and rain and confusion by frightened young men trying desperately to survive. In those real conditions, American advantages in training, coordination, and doctrine proved decisive. The Sherman tank that American tankers fought in at Arracourt was a product of American industrial philosophy and military thinking. It was designed for mass production, mechanical reliability, and ease of maintenance rather than individual superiority. Every Sherman was identical, using standardized parts that could be swapped between vehicles. Crews could transition between tanks without retraining. The radio systems were reliable, simple to operate, and powerful enough to maintain communication in difficult terrain. These weren't flashy specifications that made good propaganda, but they were the characteristics that won battles. The crew positions in a Sherman reflected American emphasis on specialization and teamwork. The commander focused entirely on tactics and coordination, freed from operating the gun or driving. The gunner concentrated on target engagement without distraction. The loader, driver, and assistant driver each had specific responsibilities. This division of labor maximized efficiency, but only worked if the crew functioned as a seamless team. Radio communication between crews extended this teamwork to the company and battalion level. German Panthers, by contrast, often required the commander to operate the radio, load the gun, and direct the driver while simultaneously trying to maintain tactical awareness. This was possible for exceptional commanders, but exhausting for average ones. As German training standards collapsed in late 1944, the complexity of operating a Panther became a liability. Crews were overwhelmed by the demands of their sophisticated machines, while American crews in simpler Shermans could focus on fighting rather than just operating their vehicles. The artillery support that proved so devastating to German armour at Arracourt was itself enabled by radio coordination. American forward observers equipped with radios could call for fire missions on targets anywhere on the battlefield. Battalion and division artillery commanders maintained constant radio contact with all firing batteries, allowing them to concentrate fire from multiple units on a single target within minutes. The Germans had similar artillery capabilities but lacked the communication systems to employ them with American flexibility and speed. Fighter-bomber support represented another dimension of American coordination superiority. Air-ground radio systems allowed tank commanders to communicate directly with aircraft overhead, or with forward air controllers who could vector fighters to targets. At Arracourt, P-47 Thunderbolts repeatedly attacked German armour concentrations within minutes of being called by ground forces. This required radio systems that were compatible between services, doctrine that emphasized air-ground cooperation, and training that prepared both tankers and pilots for coordinated operations. The Germans had attempted similar systems but never achieved American levels of integration. The human cost of the Battle of Arracourt was measured not just in destroyed tanks, but in the shattered confidence of German armoured forces. Veterans who had fought across Russia, who had survived Kursk and Normandy, were psychologically broken by an enemy they didn't understand. American tankers seemed to anticipate German moves, to coordinate responses faster than German commanders could process information, to be everywhere simultaneously while individual German tanks fought alone. This demoralization would persist through the final months of the war, as German tankers increasingly realized that courage and skill couldn't overcome systematic American advantages. For American tankers, Arracourt validated everything they had learned about modern armoured warfare. Individual tank specifications mattered less than crew quality and coordination. Radio communication was as important as armour thickness. Doctrine that emphasized teamwork and information sharing could overcome material disadvantages. These lessons, learned in the Forest of Normandy and perfected in the fields around Arracourt, would influence American military thinking for decades. The revolution in military affairs, represented by network communication, began on those foggy September mornings, when 5 Shermans coordinated through radio defeated dozens of Panthers fighting alone. The Battle of Arracourt remains less famous than larger engagements like the Battle of the Bulge or the race across France. But for military historians studying the evolution of armoured warfare, Arracourt represents a watershed moment when traditional measures of combat power, armour thickness, gun caliber, and horsepower gave way to new metrics of crew training, tactical doctrine, and communication systems. The Germans brought their best tanks to Arracourt. The Americans brought their best tactics. Tactics won. In the decades after World War II, as military analysts studied what had worked and what hadn't, the lessons of Arracourt became foundational to American armoured doctrine. The emphasis on communication, coordination, and crew discipline that proved decisive in September 1944 would be amplified and refined through subsequent conflicts. The modern American military's obsession with information superiority, network-centric warfare, and combined arms coordination all trace their roots to battles like Arracourt, where American forces learned that knowing what was happening and coordinating response mattered more than having the biggest gun. For the German military, Arracourt represented a failure to adapt that would characterize the final months of the war. Confronted with clear evidence that American tactical doctrine was superior, German commanders continued to emphasize technical specifications and individual tank superiority. They built even heavier tanks with even bigger guns, the Tiger II and Jagdtiger, massive vehicles that were nearly invulnerable in single combat, but increasingly irrelevant in a battlefield environment where coordinated American forces could concentrate overwhelming firepower through radio-directed combined arms. The Germans never solved the tactical problems revealed at Arracourt because they never fully recognized what those problems were. The Sherman tank that fought at Arracourt would continue to serve in American and Allied forces for decades after World War II. Its mechanical reliability, ease of maintenance, and suitability for mass production made it the foundation of American armored forces through the Korean War and beyond. But more important than the vehicle itself was the tactical system built around it, a system where communication and coordination transformed adequate equipment into a decisive weapon. That system, first perfected on the battlefields of France in September 1944, remains the core of American military doctrine today. The story of 5 Shermans defeating dozens of Panthers encapsulates the broader story of American victory in World War II. It wasn't about having the best individual weapons, though American equipment was generally excellent. It was about having the best systems, the best training, the best doctrine, and the best ability to coordinate complex operations. The Germans built sophisticated machines operated by brave men fighting according to outdated doctrine. The Americans built adequate machines operated by well-trained crews fighting according to revolutionary doctrine. In that matchup, doctrine triumphed over specification, coordination defeated individual superiority, and radio communication proved more valuable than armor plate. The veterans of the 4th Armored Division who fought at Arracourt understood what they had accomplished. They had proven that American tankers could defeat German armor not by matching German specifications, but by fighting smarter, coordinating better, and using their strengths to negate enemy advantages. They had demonstrated that the Sherman, derided by critics as inadequate, was actually the right tank for the war America was fighting, a war where mass production, mechanical reliability, and tactical flexibility mattered more than individual combat power. And they had shown that the radio systems installed in every American tank, often overlooked in discussions of combat power, were actually among the most important weapons in the American arsenal. When Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams stood in the September sunlight on September 30th, surveying the wreckage of the German 5th Panzer Army's offensive, he understood that the battle just concluded represented more than a tactical victory. It was proof of concept for a new way of war, a way where information and coordination mattered more than armor and firepower. The fog that had descended on Arracourt 10 days earlier had revealed a fundamental truth about modern warfare. You didn't need to see the enemy if you could communicate with your fellow tankers and coordinate your response. American radios had turned fog from an obstacle into an advantage, allowing American forces to fight blind better than German forces could fight in clear weather. The Germans would try again at the Battle of the Bulge in December, massing armor for one final offensive. They would achieve tactical surprise, but ultimately fail for the same reasons they failed at Arracourt. American forces could coordinate faster, adapt quicker, and concentrate combat power more effectively than German formations, constrained by limited radio communication and rigid doctrine. The pattern established at Arracourt would repeat at a larger scale. German tactical and technical advantages would be overwhelmed by American systematic superiority in coordination and information flow. The Battle of Arracourt demonstrated that in modern warfare, no tank is an island. Individual combat power matters far less than the ability to coordinate with other tanks, call for artillery support, direct fighter bombers, and adapt to changing battlefield conditions. The Sherman tank with its 3 radio sets and well-trained crew was a node in a network vastly more capable than its specification suggested. The Panther with its thick armor and powerful gun was often a lone warrior, less capable than its specifications promised. In that fundamental difference lay the outcome of battles and ultimately the war.